So Michael Saylor has yet again come up with a new and astonishing prediction for Bitcoin. At least according to this video, Michael Saylor seems to believe that our idea of comparing Bitcoin to gold may not be accurate in terms of its value. It actually could be something else. In this video, I think he had some very interesting concepts, which I think we need to seriously consider. And if you are watching this, please be sure to like and subscribe after the video if you really liked it. So let's get into it and see what Michael Saylor has to say that's going to be so astonishing.
When you think of it as digital gold, then it should replace gold. Gold's worth $10 trillion, and that takes Bitcoin to 500,000.
Woo!
But when you think of it as digital property, like replacing buildings and land and other long storeholds of wealth, then, you know, you're up by a factor of 20 or 30 from there. I mean, it should not be... It's much better than digital gold because I can move Bitcoin at the speed of light and I can program it to 1 million transactions an hour on an iPhone or a website. You can't do that with gold. So it's got more utility than gold, which means it's probably worth 20 or 30 trillion if it just replaces the gold.
MicroStrategy executive chairman and co-founder Michael Saylor is arguably one of the biggest Bitcoin maximalists.
Okay, let's just hold it right there. So just to summarize this a little bit, Michael Saylor is saying, okay, if you think of Bitcoin as gold, then Bitcoin should be, and Bitcoin replaces gold, then it's worth maybe like half a million dollars per Bitcoin, right? But he's suggesting that maybe you should be looking at Bitcoin as property, like basically to replace property in terms of like real estate and all these types of things that we know today. And he says, well, from there, you're now looking at something that's 20x more value, right? Which is in the millions, which is way bigger proposition in comparison. And he actually gives a pretty good summation really quickly about the advantages that Bitcoin has over property. And I'm sure he's going to go into it more. But that's just the summary of what Michael Saylor's proposing here. I think it may be true. If you've ever owned property, if you've ever like worked with trying to do something in real estate to gain value, you'll understand it's not as glamorous as some people might think it is. And it's not as profitable as some people might think it is. I think that the proposition for Bitcoin in comparison to investing in property is actually way better. Like there's just so much less friction involved that I think it's a very good chance that it will not be considered like gold, but instead could replace property, as Michael Saylor suggests here. But let's get into this so we can see just all the reasons why this might be the case, which means some pretty exciting prospects for the future. Let's see.
In the space. Not only is he and his company heavily invested in the asset, but he also dedicates much of his time to orange pilling others about the great qualities of the world's leading cryptocurrency.
I like that term. Orange pilling.
Saylor
I'm going to use that.
These qualities while also examining how Bitcoin compares to other assets like gold, real estate, and various fiat currencies. According to the former MicroStrategy chief executive officer, Bitcoin is right on track to replace gold, which would see prices jump to around $500,000 per coin. But Bitcoin is much more than just digital gold. It is a digital property carefully designed to replace and outperform other forms of assets and store holds of wealth. According to Saylor, the result of all this is Bitcoin becoming a multi-trillion-dollar asset class that offers investors endless possibilities in 2023 and beyond. We will now take you to Michael Saylor's interview.
I consider the value of all of the property in the world that's used to store wealth. So right now, if you're a wealthy individual and you wanted to give money to your grandchildren, you have a number of choices. You can either buy bars of gold, or you can buy ranches. You could buy blocks of Manhattan or buildings. You can buy shares of companies, corporate stocks. You could put money in a savings account and maybe buy sovereign debt or bonds, corporate bonds or other bonds. And when you add up all this stuff, it's like $500 trillion worth of stuff that people use.
Wow.
And the challenge with all these things is is how do I know if I had $1 million today that it would still be worth $1 million 100 years? If I buy a city block in Manhattan, it's kind of intuitive that over 200 years, the value of that city block will go up.
Yes.
And if more people move in Manhattan, it'll go up. And so the positives are people move in the city and I got a share of the economic activity of the city. The negatives are it's going to get taxed by the mayor of Manhattan. There's going to be zoning regulation by the neighborhood zoning board. It's going to get potentially taxed by the state of New York. It might be the politician decides they really want to build Central Park on my block of land and they just take it from me and they pay me, sub-market, or maybe they want to turn my land into an airport or into a port. So you own property. It sounds really good, but you have to fight to maintain that property over 100 years, and your children's children will have to fight to maintain it.
Okay, so just hold it right there. So he's making some really good points when it comes to property. So he's talking about how you can have the property, but then there's the ongoing property taxes. There's the counterparty risk that comes with owning property because you don't actually own it. You're subject to the state and wherever you live in terms of those property taxes, in terms of zoning laws, in terms of some change that they decide where they think they're going to use your land for something, and you're not going to get basically the value that you thought you had in there. So if you're trying to create generational wealth, if you're trying to be able to find a way to be able to keep your wealth, you still have counterparty risk when it comes to owning property, right? It's not, so you've moved out of fiat currencies that might have been in savings or in stocks, and now you moved into the counterparty risk of owning property. And people just don't even think about all the prospects that Michael Saylor talked about. And they are very real. They will happen. You will deal with potentially municipalities or counties that actually are taxing you for wherever your property might be. And they may have a change in their taxing policy. The next thing you know, you're paying even more for something which you didn't plan for. And you have to maintain that. Like you said, you have to fight for it. You constantly have to be taking care of the property and having to defend it. And meanwhile, if you use Bitcoin, the network defends itself. You don't have to pay for that. So that is a huge advantage compared to property. And so I think he has a really great point here. And all the things he's talking about when it comes to property, those are words of experience, my friend. They are definitely based on things that probably have happened to Michael Saylor himself. So yeah, I would take that seriously. Yeah, let's keep going.
$1 million of economic value in 100 years ago, and I held it in dollars. The U.S. dollar is expanding about 7% a year for the past 100 years. So if you do the math, you find that you lose 99% of the economic value in cash. And that's why nobody in their right mind would put $1 million of cash in a box and put a time lock on it. And in the year 2120, expect their great-grandchildren to open the box and for it to be worth anything. It will be worth nothing.
Sure.
If I put $1 million of gold in a box, 100 years from now, the challenge is, will the bank or the government seize the gold? Pretty much every country on earth stole everybody's gold over the last 100 years. If you had it in Germany, it got stolen multiple times. The British, the French, the Japanese, the Russians, even the Americans stole everybody's gold. So, and if it didn't get stolen, that's what we call counterparty risk, seizure, confiscation. If it didn't get stolen, if you increase the gold supply by 2% a year, then you realize the half-life of money in gold, that seems the half-life of energy in a battery. The half-life of money in gold is 35 years. You can't stop the gold miners from mining gold. So ultimately, the economic energy stored in the container of gold is dissipating at 2 to 3% a year, which means you're going to cut it in half once, twice, 3 times, right? So you're going to be down to 12.5% of what you had, even if it doesn't get seized. So when you think about these things, you realize that gold doesn't really hold economic energy great. It just happens to be the best portable, non-sovereign way to move energy around. Yeah, it's semi-portable. You couldn't move $1 million of gold through an airport, but it's more portable than a building. Right? You're not moving your building out of LA ever.
It's interesting the things he's lining up here. he's talking about now. So he talked about property and about that's crazy. He's now talking about dollars, and if you were to try to save that for 100 years, obviously it wouldn't be worth very much. Obviously, to most people, that's not a good idea. And now he's talking about gold. The fact is that gold is a little more portable than when it comes to property, obviously, because you're not going to be able to move property. But the issue, of course, is that it doesn't have the same kind of value stay. Simply because there's always more gold that's being mined, right? And that's affecting its long-term viability in terms of its value. So, and in terms of portability, yeah, it's not that easy to move around. And of course, everybody's looking to steal it. So that's not too good either. So I can see him making these arguments about like the issues that exist with all these other assets in comparison to the value that you would have in Bitcoin. So, and of course he's probably getting to that, but you can see these are the real world issues that exist with the way things are now. So I think that it's a good point. So, I mean, I know a lot of people that are really excited about gold, and I think it's simply because it's something that is familiar to people. But they have all these issues too. Try and go to a store and try to offer gold to be able to buy something. More times than not, you're not going to be able to do it. And then secondly, these are places that probably would take Bitcoin over gold today, right? So keep that in mind. Anyways, let's keep going.
Maybe. Well, they have cultural risk. Will people still want to watch football and soccer in 100 years? And they're not so portable, and they're very political. Then you have things that look straightforward, like owning 1,000 acres of land. But if your enemy takes over as governor of the state, they just pass a property tax and they tax your land away from you. And then the oldest cliche is lost the family farm because we couldn't pay the property taxes.
High taxes, inflation, currency debasement, government overreach, and censorship are some of the great flaws of existing asset classes. This is probably the same conclusion Saylor reached in 2020 before he decided to make a long-term investment of $250 million in Bitcoin. Ooh. His company was sitting on a pile of cash that was getting devalued fast, and no financial asset was worth the risk until Saylor really looked into Bitcoin. 2 years later, MicroStrategy is the public company with the largest Bitcoin holding, with no hint of slowing down anytime soon. According to the millionaire investor, MicroStrategy will keep buying more Bitcoin for as long as possible. Let's get back to Saylor's interview as he discusses what he envisions Bitcoin prices will look like in the coming years.
When you think of it as digital gold, then it should replace gold. Gold's worth $10 trillion, and that takes Bitcoin to 500,000. But when you think of it as digital property, like replacing buildings and land and other long storeholds of wealth, then, you're up by a factor of 20 or 30 from there. I mean, it should not be... It's much better than digital gold because I can move Bitcoin at the speed of light and I can program it to 1 million transactions an hour on an iPhone or a website. You can't do that with gold. By the way. So it's got more utility than gold, which means it's probably worth 20 or 30 trillion if it just replaces the gold. But instead of buying the Fontainebleau Hotel, which is a nice hotel, worth whatever billions in Miami Beach, instead of buying the equivalent amount of Bitcoin, if you bought the Bitcoin, you can move that to any city in the world every hour of the day, compose it, decompose it, recompose it, dematerialize it. And,
True.
When there's a nasty tax on it, you can just move yourself to a different jurisdiction where there's a better tax treatment. And
jurisdictional
if you
agility,
think of it like that, then it's a multi-$100 trillion asset class. So at 10 trillion, it's 500,000. At 100 trillion, it's 5 million. So I think, we're marching toward $10 trillion, which is, $10 million a coin.
Wow.
Which is why Bitcoin enthusiasts see it's just a very great long-term store of value. And it's a great investment idea because it meets the needs of 8 billion people. The average person, the middle-class person that drives an Uber or works as a dentist, they can't buy $387 worth of a building in New York City every month is their savings plan, right? And a person in Africa can't buy a small share of a nice piece of property. They can't buy $127 worth of Picasso painting. So Bitcoin offers property rights at any scale, any amount of money, anybody in the world. And you don't have to worry about, well, people like Picasso's. Will they still want buildings in Vegas or New York? Will some politician tax it away from me? Well, can I take it through an airport? So if you're looking for an egalitarian, utilitarian way for people to save money and protect their life force or protect their economic wealth for the next 100 years, and you are looking for something that's kind of consistent with the mobile wave, Android phones, iPhones, websites, that's truly global.
Okay, so let's hold it right there. Yeah, there's a lot of to unpack there. So he made some very good points about jurisdictional agility, your ability. What was probably the most important point he was making was the fact that you can have property rights at any scale. So for a lot of people, just the dream of owning a home one day is something that they're always looking for, or just, in terms of like the things that they own in their lives. The fact that you can own as much as like $10 worth of Bitcoin, or even 100 or 300, whatever. This gives scale that allows for anybody around the world to actually gain property rights. And that, compared to all these other assets he was talking about, having to be like, you can't buy $300 worth of a hotel. You can't do these, you can't have part ownership in all these other things around the world. These are exclusive to only people who are ultra rich oftentimes. This gives scale to everybody, to everyone in the world. So that is a very exciting factor in terms of why Bitcoin. And of course, the beauty of it, as he just said, is that you don't have to worry about if something has changed in the future. You don't have to worry about if somebody really likes art, or somebody who's really going to stay at this hotel, or if there's going to be enough people to, go to the city. All these factors that go into the potential of holding value for these different assets no longer is a factor, because everybody wants your Bitcoin, right? It's everywhere. It's at all levels. It's at all, like, it's almost like the digital water to give life. So I think that that's a really good, he's made some awesome points in terms of like why Bitcoin compared to property. And if that's the case, as he said, we're marching towards $10 million Bitcoin. That's hard to imagine given the price now. But when you put this all together and you look at all these factors, it's only a matter of time when other people start to arrive at this logical conclusion about where their value is going to go. And being able to see this early is key, because as we go towards that $10 million Bitcoin, how much of it are you going to be able to get your hands on by then? By then it's too late. It's the opportunities to be able to be part of this is going to be much more slim. If not systematically by existing governments or regulators, by simply the scale of the economy moving so much into Bitcoin. Now it's just really, really early in comparison. So pretty exciting stuff. Let's see if there's any more to this.
Long term. American venture capitalist and founder of DFJ, Tim Draper, recently predicted that Bitcoin prices will hit $250,000 in 2023. Draper discussed his outlook for the crypto asset at the just concluded World Summit, updating a previous prediction from 2018. 4 years ago, at the Draper University Blockchain Party, the venture capitalist had predicted that Bitcoin would hit $250,000 by 2022. He has now extended the timeline by 6 months, stating that the crypto asset will hit $250,000 by mid-2023. In 2014, Draper had correctly predicted that Bitcoin would be higher than $10,000 by 2017. Do you think Bitcoin could hit 6 figures next year, giving Draper another correct prediction?
So that was interesting. So on the side note, Tim Draper has predicted that by 2023, we're going to see a $250,000 Bitcoin. That's just half a year away. Apparently, he predicted this to be happening as of this year, but due to the headwinds in the economy, he's pushed that out 6 months. Do you think it's going to happen in mid-2023? Oh, it's tough to say. It's so tough to say, but I think that there's going to be some serious movements. And if people like Tim Draper, who have been right about their predictions for Bitcoin in the past, are making these calls, might be something to look at. Leave your comments down below so that we'd be able to see what you think about this. Are you betting on a $250,000 Bitcoin by mid-2023? Do you think Bitcoin is going to be considered as property and not gold and actually become a part of a multi-trillion-dollar industry, which will see Bitcoin at basically $5 million each? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't done that yet, and we'll see you in the next one.